It's the Forever Knight-A-Thon Season 2. We're recapping and reviewing every single episode of Season 2 of the 1990s Canadian police procedural Forever Knight about a vampire detective taking a bite at a crime. Season 2, Episode 5, Forward into the Past, opens on an old lady getting tortured to death. There's no real way to sugarcoat that. That's just what happens. I didn't write it. The only two homicide detectives in Toronto, Nick Knight and Donald Skanke, arrive on the scene. Nick recognizes the old lady, even though in his memories she's clearly played by a different actress. Turns out she's the lifelong friend and, I guess, assistant to someone Nick used to be close with, Katherine Barrington, the wife of a businessman who got murdered by his business partner, the villainous Daniel Carruthers. Because the police were slightly more corrupt than normal, she was unable to do anything about this. And even worse, with her husband's murder most foul, she's now the largest shareholder in whatever his company is, which puts her squarely in Carruthers' sights. So Nick brought her to the mysterious Aristotle, a guy who helps vampos create new lives elsewhere so that nobody notices they're not aging and shit. Aristotle helps Katherine disappear, but in order to keep Carruthers from getting sole control of her husband's company, she sends votes in absentia at every shareholder meeting through registered mail, cycling the locations she sends it from in order to make sure Carruthers can't trace her. Also, the young Katherine is played by Stephanie Morgenstern, and the minute I heard her voice, I was like, that's Sailor Venus. Indeed, she was the voice of Sailor Venus in the Deke dub of Sailor Moon, and it seems like her career has taken off since then as the co-creator of the hit, by Canadian standards, police procedural Flashpoint, which, as far as I know, features no vampires and is thus irrelevant. Why this digression, you may ask? Well, because this episode's boring. It's the most boring the show has ever been to me. I gotta talk about something. I do not care about this conflict. Hey, Nick? Kill Carruthers. Much easier solution here. You know he's the killer. You know if left to his own devices, he will kill again. You're not a cop at this point. You have no responsibilities to rich people. Or hypnotize him so that he confesses. Intimidate him with your spooky vampire face. There are so many simple ways to deal with this problem instead of this incredibly elaborate system you've concocted. So, okay, because of the aforementioned old lady torture, Carruthers knows where Barrington is, and he's gonna get her. Nick visits the young assistant to the old lady, and so the thing about her is that she's psychic, and she uses her psychic powers to find Barrington. But, of course, all she can see is that people are dancing and there's a disco ball. That's all she can see with her psychic powers. And that's just thrown in there for plot convenience. And sure, yes, okay. We know from season 1 that psychic powers exist in this world, even though everyone in the scene seems to have forgotten that they already knew this and react as though this were new information, but okay, sure. You'd think introducing something like that would be a huge deal for the story. Nope. The psychic lady gets murdered, immediately, and that's all she does in the episode. It is purely for the sake of narrative convenience to introduce the disco ball and dancing. Please remember that. Please remember that fact. Nick does what he does best and asks Jeanette to solve the problem for him by locating Aristotle so he can pester Aristotle about where Katherine is. Jeanette does, and Nick goes to see him, and we see through parallel shots that Aristotle is in the exact same place he was. He hasn't moved, so it's not clear why Nick needed Jeanette to do this for him then. Did he just forget where Aristotle was? Of course, Aristotle can't help Nick, because the whole point of his whole thing is to help people go missing and be untraceable. So, no, man. Can't do that. Instead, Nick finds her because... So, in an old photo, he recognizes the shadow of a car that Barrington's husband had given her, and she had wanted to keep, but she couldn't because that's the new life rules. So Nick sees the shadow, immediately puts together that it's that specific type of car, and then he can trace the car with police computer, and he can go find her. So he goes to her house, but she's not there, and he finds a poster for a ballroom dancing event on the fridge, just like in the psychic's vision. Okay, so you introduced the psychic lady very lazily so that Nick would know where Barrington was when he saw that poster. But here's the thing. He would already know that when he saw the poster of it. The poster has the information Nick requires. He wouldn't need to know. The whole psychic... I accept a certain level of contrivance. Sure. Not when it's completely unnecessary. Why are you contriving elements that serve no purpose in the story? Nick, of course, saves the day and arrests Carruthers, and everything is fine, and I didn't care even a little bit. What a complete waste of everyone's time. I do not care about this woman or her problems. We're just told that she and Nick and her husband are close friends, but we're given no reason to value that relationship whatsoever. The whole story is a mess, and the episode only briefly becomes entertaining whenever Aristotle is on screen. He's the one element of this episode that is interesting. Just this put-upon bureaucrat who is so sick of the needless entitlement of his vampire clientele. How every rule and boundary he attempts to establish is immediately contradicted, and he's just so over it. There's also a nice little callback to the enforcers, the vampire cops, distinct from cop vampires, who kill people to protect the secret of vampirism.
Two friends, they need to disappear. They're mortals.
Nicholas, I'd be incinerated for even thinking what you're suggesting. If the enforcers ever catch wind of this, we're dead.
It's very rare for Forever Knight to be consistent in its lore like that, so I enjoyed that little one for the fans, the real Knightheads out there. This episode should, in my opinion, have been about something. Sure, there was a story, but that story didn't really tell us anything about Nick, or anyone else for that matter. It could have been a reflection on how difficult the transition between lives is for Nick, how hard it's been to move on repeatedly, losing all of his connections time and time again, demonstrating what a curse vampirism is to him. What if Nick had to investigate the murder of someone he knew from a past life that he had been forced to abandon? What if there was no second chance to reconnect? What if he had to grapple with the guilt of knowing that had he stayed, he might have saved them? What if that case then naturally came into conflict with his need to avoid people and places he knew in past lives? He had to both avenge his friend while also avoiding being discovered. That's a lot more interesting. There's a million angles they could have went with here, and it kind of sucks that they went with the most boring possible version of this story. Tomorrow, an American convict is caught in Toronto and due to be sent back to be executed, and it's up to Nick to try and prove she's innocent before time runs out. Oh boy! I want to give a special thank you to my web puppets over on Patreon. We've got Wolfman Jack, Cooper Holmes, Joe McClory, Liz Widow, C.H. Phillips, Gideon, David Kaler, and Andrew Roger. And I, Bobby Duke, the star of the channel, would like to thank these other people who's also the stars of the channel. We got Jay Torney, Connor Patrick Griffin, Rachel Ratt, Cato Moore, Carpad, Josh Manes, and Hyla Tracy. Hope you're enjoying this Forever Knight shit that Mildo insists on doing every year. I don't really get it myself. I don't know, I'm trying to reduce my screen time. That's just me though, you know? Like, who cares about some show from the 90s nobody's ever heard of?